to today's special NAIOP Tri-State COVID-19 response program. I am Kyle Naye. I'm the program chair of the NAIOP New York City chapter. We would like to thank you for tuning in to today's collaborative program, which is hosted by 4 different chapters: the New York City chapter, the New Jersey chapter, the Connecticut Suburban New York chapter, and the Upstate New York chapter. Today, we have expert panels that are lined up to discuss how the tri-state metropolitan area and leaders across the commercial real estate industry are working together to safely reopen the economy while also balancing public health concerns. These will be interactive discussions. We encourage all participants to submit questions to the speakers using the Q&A function in your control panel. Hopefully you see it down below. And we will get to as many questions as possible throughout each presentation, taking those likely in the last 10 minutes. With that, I would like to introduce Mike McGuinness, who is the CEO of the NAIOP New Jersey chapter, who is going to moderate our opening panel and provide a public policy update and discuss what the region's recovery plan means for the commercial real estate industry. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you to introduce this morning's speakers.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, it's my pleasure to get this conversation going, and it's also a pleasure to be able to introduce our speakers today. So starting with Rachel Loeb, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where she oversees and directs the corporation's strategic priorities for real estate, asset management, and planning. And prior to that, she worked for a private developer and has had a very interesting work experience. Joe Kelley is Deputy Chief of Staff for the Economic Growth for New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. Joe has significant experience in the political realm, having worked on the campaigns for U.S. Senators Chris Murphy and Richard Blumenthal in Connecticut. So with that, I think we would all agree that the month of March felt like an entire decade. And fortunately, things are starting to brighten up now that we're moving into the summer months. I think we would all agree. Seems like the peak of the viral contagion is hopefully behind us. Let me ask each of you to take 5 or 6 minutes and just tell me about your organization, and then how your role has changed. What was your role prior to, say, March 10th? And what has your role been since that time? So, Joe, let me start with you for Governor Murphy. Tell us, if you would, your role, and how your life has changed.
Yeah, so first off, thank you, Mike, for inviting me and to NAIOP and the members. You got a lot of friends out there, and we work closely with you guys. So thank you for everything you did before this, and you know, since obviously the pandemic has gotten underway, you've been absolutely critical partners. So thanks again. You know, my past experience, as you mentioned, was kind of more in the political space. I had my own consulting firm before this. Got hooked up with the governor in late 2015, 2016, when he was then, you know, Ambassador Murphy exploring running, and then was a deputy campaign manager on the campaign, which was obviously successful. And from there, he brought me into government because on the campaign, one of the things I did was deal with the business community, deal with economic development issues, and had always had a keen interest in economic development from a public policy and kind of a political perspective in my past lives. You know, done things like worked on the community board for Midtown Manhattan when I lived in New York. So I think, you know, his hope was for me to come on and coordinate and manage a lot of the stakeholder you know, relationships from the governor's office, help coordinate and manage the different departments and agencies that run the gamut from transportation to, you know, to finance, groups like the Port Authority or Economic Development Authority. And then lastly, work with him on marketing the state, which has been a huge priority. You know, we've done foreign direct investment trips, trade missions to India, to Israel, to Germany. And then obviously, talking to the film industry or other key sectors throughout the state and our country. So basically my job before March 10th was broken down into marketing the state, managing, coordinating different departments and agencies, and then the key stakeholder work I do with folks like NAIOP to make sure your voices and your members are heard. On March 10th, things shifted a bit, to say the least. The first month of this was really about kind of trying to put a tourniquet on things and help with stuff like PPE and beds, and working with folks like Gus Milano, who's a dear friend, on setting up field hospitals, and working with a lot of your members to just, like I said, figure out where the crisis points are and help manage them. And then now we shift into kind of the restart and recovery mode, where again, take critical feedback from this group and others to understand not only how we start to dial up the private sector, but understand, what are the long-term policies we need to put in place for recovery.
Sounds good. Rachel, you've got a different perspective in your role on not really being, I guess, a government agency, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what your group does and how your role has changed?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for inviting me, and hello to everybody, to wherever you may find yourself throughout the region. I'm in my dining room, and we'll see if a child walks through. Sure. At its core, EDC, the New York City Economic Development Corporation, is an organization that's dedicated to strengthening communities across the 5 boroughs. We do this through collaboration with industry sectors and investments in local neighborhoods. And every day we wake up and we think about how to make New York City a more inclusive place for today and for generations to come. And we do this through strategic public-private partnerships. Like Joe before March 10th, EDC is an organization and was an organization of about 550 professionals. We are made up of sort of dedicated public servants, although we're technically a nonprofit with a charter to New York City to administer real estate on its behalf. So we're also an asset management organization. We manage about 65 million square feet throughout the 5 boroughs on behalf of the city of New York. That's everything from the cruise terminals to Sunset Park and the industrial parks up in the Bronx and out in East New York. We administer the ground leases on 42nd Street. So those assets that we manage on behalf of the city of New York generate income for EDC that we then use to spearhead initiatives that will help drive jobs and industries of the future. We also execute about $8 billion of capital projects, construction capital projects on behalf of the city of New York. So you probably have walked on the High Line. We built that. We build parks. We build stadiums. We will build schools. We'll build libraries. We'll you name it. If they need us to help, we will build something. So we are developers. We also transact on underutilized real estate to harness those unused air rights and the development potential and use that to meet policy objectives. We have our own city planners. We're land use professionals and transportation planners. And then we are policy folks. We've got economists, we've got consultants internally, and we've got people who think about jobs of the future. And so for a decade, the last decade, we've really been working all together and making key investments into strategic industries that we thought were the growth of the future, like advanced manufacturing and life sciences. And what we found is, but also making sure, I should say, that we are supporting traditional areas like manufacturing. And what we found is that on March 10th, it was these very relationships and these very investments that we were able to turn on a dime and pivot to respond to the immediate needs that were met. And so whether it be standing up supply chains or protecting the food supply chain, because we actually manage and are the asset manager for the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center up in the Bronx, or being able to call on our manufacturing partners, we pivoted on a dime. So just like Joe, I'll say, you know, I'll give you an example of what we've been doing since March 10th. So we turned a lot of our assets into to service emergency needs. So if you saw the US Comfort ship, the Navy Comfort ship come in, that was our team that figured out a way to dredge the Hudson in 8 days so that it would be deep enough so that the ship that is much bigger than your typical cruise ship comes in, could provide those emergency beds. And we made it was an amazing collaboration of the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, New York City, state, and the federal government working together and the Ports of America, our manager, working together to bring that ship. We've turned the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal into a COVID bed hospital down in out near Red Hook. We established a food distribution center at the Kingsbridge Armory, and we've worked with private hospital owners to provide, hotel owners to provide emergency beds and stays for either hospital workers or first responders. We created our own manufacturing company. We basically stood up a manufacturing company so that we could make sure that the PPE needs of our hospitals and our first responders were met locally. So we have procured with local manufacturers face shields, gowns, masks. We're partnering with over 70 local businesses to provide these materials. We've already created 1 million face shields, and we think we're going to create up to additional 2 million. So for us, not only are we creating the PPE, but we're actually making sure that jobs are still happening. We've had people like bring furloughed workforces back. We've made 800,000 gowns. We worked down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was an original EDC investment in advanced manufacturing with MIT to create this bridge ventilator, which you might have read about in the New York Times. And that was a month project of our capital investment, companies that we helped stand up, a manufacturer in Long Island City that got incentive investment for us to do a life science manufacturing, all worked collaborated together to get that ventilator going. We also announced this past Sunday, we can locally produce all the test kits that we're gonna need. So again, a partnership with EDC, a local manufacturer that's doing 3D printing of the nasal swabs, and Albert Einstein College working together to provide the liquid that transferred. None of that would have been able to happen if we hadn't been making the investments of the last 10 years in life science and advanced manufacturing. The last thing I'll mention and then turn it back over is the supporting small businesses, which is really crucial to us. You know, there's the PPP program, which is being tapped, but what we saw very early on is that small businesses and MWBE owned companies were being left out of that. So as of Monday, we've directly supported over 3,500 small businesses with $54 million of capital to help them retain employees, help them stay open. And over 50% of this has gone to MWBEs. So some of them are grants, some of them are low interest loans. And again, this is partnering with large banks so that we can harness this, their funds. And then we're doing stimulus work and then focusing on the science like Joe of when we can start to think about opening the economy, and then we'll look at recovery. So that's a very, very quick overview. And I'm sorry if I spoke very quickly, but there's a lot going on.
Rachel, that was unbelievable. I mean, you guys are like into everything, and I'm just very, very, very amazed.
I'm truly in awe of my colleagues.
Yeah, well,
who were one day doing fashion and now they're doing.
Just amazing, just amazing. So obviously, this disruption has been nothing like we've ever seen before. Hurricane Sandy, the stock market crash in 2008. It's people will not have a short memory of this one because we're going to be living with this for quite some time. As we start to pivot to reentry and recovery efforts, it's actually a two-part question. I guess we'll just throw it all together. So initially, I would ask you, how are your entities, your agencies, coordinating, collaborating with private sector and other government agencies, whether at the local, county, state, federal level? How are you managing all that? And then when it's all said and done, well, as it's being said and done, how do you see the streetscape, the main streets, the landscape? What do you think it's going to look like, 3-6 months from now? How will things be different for tourists, for residents, for shoppers? I mean, how do you see that all trending? So, Joe, let me flip it back to you, and however you choose to address those issues in terms of collaboration, or ultimately, what the goal here is and how you see things changing.
Sure. So I'm going to answer them in opposite order, because I think the problems that we're faced with in terms of communities and landscape and density and such inform kind of how we responded. So the first thing is, if you look at what the governor put forth in the 2018 economic plan, if you look at the draft incentives we were negotiating prior to the pandemic, there was a big emphasis on communities, on the denser environments like Newark, AC, Patterson, Trenton to a certain extent, Jersey City, et cetera. And then trying to figure out also how the Morristowns of the world, who have done well and had maybe some challenges with retaining high occupancies, in the suburban office parks scattered around them, but their downtowns are thriving. How we kind of achieve that balancing act where the state can be a critical player in the financing of deals or in planning with our municipal partners and business attraction and development, et cetera. So that was kind of a core principle of the 2018 plan, which is basically we've got these great environments like Newark and Jersey City, which are humming along, but how can we kind of propel them? And then we've also got the Morristowns of the world, where there's, the global trend in urbanization has kind of been a good thing and bad thing, in part because walkable and livable downtowns and places like Morristown and Montclair are attractive to people from a bedroom community perspective, but there's interesting challenges for workforce and business and corporate attraction. So we started thinking about that problem in 2017, 2018, and the governor talked about it a lot during his first campaign. And simultaneously, we had projects like the American Dream development going on, and the general retail environment across the country, if not the world, kind of being stood on its head. So there was kind of some pretty vexing public policy questions and capital allocation questions that the state had to answer. Put that on a backdrop of New Jersey Transit, obviously having its own set of kind of issues, and a pull for millennials and younger workers into places like New York City, where I'm envious of Rachel. I love New Jersey, but I would love to have some of the tech companies they have knocking on our door. And a lot of them are, don't get me wrong, but there's certainly been a pull towards large cities. And so we were trying to figure out a way for New Jersey to compete using the assets it currently has, which is largely rests in our people and our communities. Then the pandemic occurred, and it challenged a lot of the things that we had. It challenged a lot of the challenges that we thought we had working against us, and it also made us look at a new set of issues. So first off, for the first time in 10 years, maybe density isn't, the prized possession that we all thought it was going to be. Now people might think, hey, a suburban office park or a little bit more space in a Newark or a Jersey City is a little bit more appealing than, say, being in New York. But at the same time, we have a regional economy that there's a tremendous amount of interdependence from New York. And so, we're not competing so much as we're all trying to thrive together. And we need to make decisions from a, workforce mobility perspective, from a community and regional planning perspective, that can all be harmonious with the new normals that are set up by the pandemic. And we're still trying to figure out what those new normals are going to be and what the regional implications are. So, coming back to, I'll just keep using the example of Newark, we saw this a little bit in the HQ2 conversations, like, is there a way where Newark could be kind of a release valve of sorts for workforce or back office. Traditionally, Jersey City has been that for New York City, but hey, as people start to push into New Jersey more and real estate prices are cheaper in Newark, and we make more investment in infrastructure in a city like Newark, could that be an appealing partnership that we would have with New York City or state? And the answer from the past has continuously been yes. And so I'm bullish that we'll all have our acts together and be able to, kind of advance these kind of regional policies. In terms of how we organized ourselves and dealt with New Jersey municipalities, New Jersey counties, state agencies, and then how it flips over to a regional approach. We said, first off, we know that we need to be talking to New Jersey industry leaders. So we are setting up in the next 24 hours an advisory council that will consist of folks like NAIOP and the Chamber and New Jersey BIA and the League of Municipalities and folks like that, all the traditional kind of trade associations and key players on State Street. But on top of that, we'll also deal with some of our leading corporate tenants, some of our community and social service leaders, economists and things like that. That'll give us a tactical or granular idea of what's going on in New Jersey. So we knew we needed that kind of microeconomic or microhealth perspective. Simultaneously, last week, the governor set up a commission, Restart and Recovery Commission, that will take more of a global or macro view. That'll be chaired by Shirley Tillman, the former president of Princeton, and Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck. Charlie Lowry, the CEO of Prudential, will be on it. Ben Bernanke, who obviously was the chairman of the Federal Reserve and played a leading role in the 2008 recovery and response, will be a member, and he's a former Princeton professor, so great nexus with New Jersey. And then a bunch of other kind of New Jersey kind of rock stars are involved in that effort as well, including Rich Besser. And so that was kind of our macroeconomic view coupled with the microeconomic view. And they'll work with stakeholders and different parts of governments, whether it's municipal or county, to get feedback and to understand how that information needs to be followed up. And then lastly, of course, we've got Jay Johnson and Rich Besser as our two regional representatives on the regional commission that stretches from Massachusetts down to Delaware. And for those governors to be working together and have representatives working to figure out issues like procurement around PPE and collective bargaining and things like that. That's been kind of our approach thus far. It's a regional, and then it goes right down to the microeconomy or the community level. So
a lot there. Rachel, how about you? What do you have to share with us in terms of that collaboration, that the streetscape and all that? New York's a totally different animal there.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go in the reverse order of Joe. So, so first and foremost, we want to ensure that the recovery efforts follow the guidance of medical professionals and are in concert with our regional partners, both in the public and private sector. So the restart is going to follow careful, smart moves, and it's going to take place when the numbers tell us it's the right thing to do. So we're leading with science, we're leading with health professionals. It's going to be data-driven and public health-driven, and that's the most important thing to this administration, and I think, and the governor as well. But believing that the science is going to lead us on the right path, we are preparing for the reopening and the recovery. Last week, the mayor announced the creation of a recovery task force. And I think probably indicative of the size of New York City. We have several of them because as you pointed out, Mike, Sandy and 9/11 decimated certain parts of the economy, as well as the financial crisis. Never have we seen, it's not like Broadway shut its doors or the airport stopped running, right, or people weren't going out to eat. So the wholesale nature of this is really unique and overwhelming, and as the numbers have shown, also taken a toll on the tax income for the city of New York. So these industry sector task force that we have are going to not only represent large business, and that's being kicked off. Actually, the first meeting is tonight, but also nonprofits, labor, and culture. So arts and culture, the museums, I mean, all of these drive tourism, all of these really drive the economy altogether, and they've been shut down in a way that's never happened before. And the goal is to make sure that we have an inclusive blueprint for recovery so that it supports all New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs. I mean, we've already seen the data that as well as who's being more disproportionately impacted by this. So who, you know, where you see unemployment in certain parts of Manhattan, I mean, the numbers are changing all the time. You see it doubled out in the boroughs. So we also have to be aware that different parts of this population of New York City are being impacted differently. If you are a restaurant worker, you can't go to work no matter what. So we're going to be meeting, this administration will be meeting with various sectors to meet their needs and their challenges, and so that we can all come back together. So we're going to start talking with the businesses. These conversations are going to be happening. We're going to make sure we're going to hear what they need. We're going to gather feedback from the major employers to better understand the questions and issues they're facing as they plan for the reopening, making sure that we are communicating to them all the questions that the answers that to the best that we can. Making sure that they're getting the guidance that they need from the city and the state and the federal government to aid in the reopening, and actually solicit their direct feedback so we can identify those gaps and enforcement challenges and our own blind spots. You know, when you're in the vortex, sometimes you can't see outside what's going on. So this is a first step. It's happening. It's happening right now. And it's the relationships that we built over years at EDC and our other agencies that are going to be the ones to help bring everybody together to the table to talk it through so we can, you know, get this goal. So this is the first step, and that is actually happening right now. And in the meantime, as we start to think, you know, and then already the agencies are talking together. You know, so as I said, we have transportation planners on staff. They have been doing emergency work, looking at how do we move food and PPE throughout the city. But they're also now working with our colleagues at city planning and at Department of Transportation to think about how do we move people throughout the city. You know, we don't manage the MTA, but we have to work incredibly closely with the MTA as they start to ramp back up so people can come back to work. How do we look at different modalities? How do we talk to each other? How do we look both in the city and throughout the region so that people can come back to work in a safe way? And you know, we will be also following the guidance from the governor of how and when the different regions of New York will open, and through that guidance, then planning the recovery. And I think then, you know, how that happens and over the time frame will then inform also the recovery. You know, with retail and restaurants, Main Street retail and restaurants, we're already having a ton of conversation with the business improvement districts, with small business services to see how we can support them so that they can open as soon as possible in the safest way so that people will feel safe coming in and they can provide the needs of the to New Yorkers. So that's what we're doing right now.
That's a lot. Actually, Rachel, you mentioned small business, and I see we have a question here. So I guess it's interesting when I think of a small business, I know the definitions vary, and sometimes, you know, you have definitions of under 500 employees,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess how many businesses these days have more than 500 employees? So the question is, who speaks for small business on these restart committees, such that small stores don't get destroyed while
Mm-hmm.
big boxes are the only ones open and get to you know, profit from all the sales?
Well, I can just speak for us. I didn't list it in the different task forces, but we do have a small business task force specifically for that reason. So we have
good.
big business, and I didn't mention all the ones, but we specifically have small business task force to address those very needs. And so they will be represented from retail, from companies, and they have a different set of needs. So they also have a voice at the table.
That's good, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same boat as Rachel and EDC. on the various, and by the way, we put small business owners as members of all these councils because in addition to having the trade groups or others who represent them, want to make sure the actual owner who looks at the P&L every day has a voice. So even on the larger macroeconomic commission, we've got a small business voice there to make sure that the voice is heard, and then literally dozens on our advisory council, which is a much larger group. So
that's good. So I guess another concern that I've heard from folks is, they're comparing, well, in my case, New Jersey to other states, and it was noted to me the other day that Connecticut, the governor of Connecticut's given a date of May 20th, when certain stores and industries or sectors can start to reopen, of course, with all the social distancing and masks and that sort of thing. New York State has come out with a rather grand scheme, and I give them a lot of credit. It's just such a diverse state, and they broke the state up into a bunch of regions, 8 or 9 regions or more. And as you said, Rachel, it'll be data driven. It seems to be it's down to a science, and you've got so many new cases coming in, and you got to maintain that for so many days. I mean, it seems to make sense. Joe, I'm in New Jersey, as are you. There's been no such dates floated out there. I haven't seen any type of, scientific sort of pathway. I'm sure it'll be dictated by science.
Yeah. Good guess.
But we're being asked, hey, how come Jersey doesn't have a date out there to give people something to look forward to?
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first off, New Jersey's reality in terms of density and size are totally different than every other state. And then you add in the amount of cases we have, and it's pretty tough. We're a pretty transient state as well. So we've got a reality that's just completely different than Connecticut's or Massachusetts or certainly California's. That's number one. Number two, and I think Rachel said a lot of really smart things so far, but one of the smartest things she said is that the economic reality is going to be dictated by the health, public health, and the decisions made there. The governor came out and I think it's done some things in the past week or so, like close schools for the remainder of the year that foreshadow kind of the seriousness of the crisis. And he's also given principles that are not based in necessarily metrics, but they are based in obviously public health outcomes that would indicate when we would begin to restart and reopen. The long story short is, you look around the country or you look around the world at things like whether it's amount of incidence levels, new cases each day, ICU beds, hospital beds, and occupancy overall. And then you layer on the top of that, the density, the size of the country, the key sectors and workforces, and you're going to, and by the way, some of these states are authoritarian regimes across the world, right? The best practices from a public health perspective on how to respond are wildly different. And so we've, I think from a public policy perspective and from an executive order perspective, we've been clear on, hey, look, this is what's closed, this is what's open, here's why, here's where we're trending in terms of school closures, these kind of key things that help people's daily lives become functional, even though that everybody is hamstrung a bit. But defining what the unique public health kind of metrics are for New Jersey has been uniquely challenging. I think you'll see more very soon from us. I'll leave it at that. But we, again, anybody who's been on the Turnpike or the Parkway, or knows Jersey City and Newark and the realities and the interdependence they have again with New York, or in Camden with Philly, right? we're in two different MSAs, and the way the virus is traveling in both of them makes it a very unique set of challenges we have from a public health kind of metrics perspective.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider, Joe. It seems like, I know, Rachel, you mentioned earlier that the Economic Development Corp, rather, has made a lot of investments over the last 10 years, and some of those investments are paying off. And it's amazing to hear about the face shields you're making, and 3D printers, and nasal swabs, and all that sort of stuff. I mean, word on the street is that there's not going to be a vaccine for this till next year, later next year. So we're all going to be living with some rather, challenging circumstances for quite a while. So I guess the question is for both of you, and Rachel, we heard a little bit already from yourself. What further investments are we planning to make, or are we willing to make in our technologies and the medical arena to take care of ourselves and not be reliant on competing with other countries or other states to get what we need? I mean, why can't we do this in-house? So whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'll just go first. I mean, I think, that's been the direction from the mayor, right? So what you see us standing up is that we will make sure that we have enough ventilators. We will make sure that we have enough gowns and PPE to take care of the residents and the frontline workers and the doctors and the nurses that care for people in New York City. And it's also a means of economic development. I mean, one of the most heartwarming stories I heard is that one of the manufacturers down in the Navy Yard that was doing face shields and that had furloughed, I can't remember what they were doing before in March, but they're now manufacturing face shields in a contract through EDC in the city of New York. And they had furloughed 100 workers. This allowed them to bring them back plus double. But then the employees actually decided that they would work half shifts instead of full shifts so that more people could get access to jobs. So you're seeing also this unique humanity as well that's coming out, which is quite remarkable. I think that what it's teaching us is that, so the investment that we made and the direction that we were going for the city of New York and looking at jobs and life science, and like we've been building on this life sciences effort for a long time, makes us even more confident that this is the right way to go, and that advanced manufacturing and traditional manufacturing are both important. Throughout Sunset Park, in our own assets that we manage, we have this amazing mixture of 3D printing and people sewing masks by hand, and that collaboration going on, I think is, we're going to continue to make investments in that. And I think the other place that we feel we're going to continue to support and where we're really pushing, and like we like to call Sunset Park, what is the potential of what a 21st century working waterfront could look like, where you've got advanced manufacturing. We are looking at making other investments in film and stage and garment manufacturing. We called it our Made in New York campus. And it was sort of all these different ideas, but things actually made in New York by New Yorkers, stretching from the Brooklyn Army Terminal down, which is sort of in the southern part of the Sunset Park waterfront, up all the way along the ways. And we just finished a lease and are about to hopefully make this investment at this South Brooklyn Marine Terminal to support the offshore wind industry, and the leases that are being done in the waterway and bringing that work onto this SBMT, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Here's taking old waterfront infrastructure, old war infrastructure from World War II, turning it back into what does 21st century working waterfront. We feel even more confident now that we were headed in the right direction, and those investments in green jobs, green technology, renewables, if anything else, this pandemic has showed us how important that is.
Sure.
So I think we will be, once we can turn toward away from the emergency needs of the moment, of the second,
Right.
that we will continue to be focusing in these areas.
Thanks, Rachel. Joe, you've got the last few minutes, Joe, before we wrap this panel up. So please give us some ideas of what future investments might look like, or what we could do, or how we can help, New Jersey be more ready.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of come back to where I started in a lot of ways. New Jersey has been, will continue to be the medicine chest of the world. Whether it's Merck or J&J or Amicus Therapeutics, life sciences, bio representation here is huge. A lot of these folks are going to continue to lead the way, not only in developing antivirals and therapeutics, but they're going to be tremendous sources for us as we look to, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but people talk about when the cold weather comes back again, could we see a ramp up in cases with future outbreaks? So we look to our corporate community, and we look to leaders like you all at NAIOP to help us safeguard and prepare for the next onslaught, as well as us relying on our governmental relationships. I think that we're in a very strong place with regard to PPE. So that's something that your members should take solace in, just in terms of the crisis of the moment. I think that on ventilators and the like, we're in a strong place. And similar to what Rachel is saying in terms of repurposing or kind of the advent of new businesses to help create the supply for needed PPE and ventilators and things like that. We've similarly seen our private sector industry step up and meet that challenge. Obviously, the federal government and the international community has a huge role in that as well. And we've had a fruitful dialogue with President Trump and the feds, both on ventilators, PPE, and the like. I think as it relates to future investment, a lot of it has to do with, again, our federal partners. Our balance sheets as a state is in a tough spot, and we're continuing to be walloped by the pandemic. I think as we start to think about recovery, and some of this is probably a little bit premature, but I think you'll come back to one of the things that I started talking about at the beginning of the panel, which is that investment in community. The places like the Newarks and Jersey Cities and Pattersons of the world are different points in kind of the renaissance, but we're going to continue to invest in them. I don't think that changes. I think places like Atlantic City that are feeling, are getting hit in an outsized fashion by this pandemic, we'll continue to invest in them and look for, support from our federal partners. And then, lastly, I would suspect, and this is probably music to a lot of your members' ears, like I would suspect that you'll look for creative approaches to stranded assets and things like the abandoned suburban office parks or assets along the Route 1 corridor where for a long time, either because of competition we felt from other states with trying to attract bio and life sciences, or because of just the global trend in urbanization that I talked about earlier in the panel, I think you'll see a state that's willing to put dollars and ideas and human capital to work on reinventing those lanes. And I welcome any ideas that this group has and look forward to working with you all.
Well, that's a lot of good stuff to think about. We're at that point in time where we need to wrap this up. So I just want to thank you, Rachel and Joe, for spending the 45 minutes or so with our members, and look forward to continue to be a resource for all of you. And let's get through this, and I'm sure we will. So again, thank you, and thank you, New York City.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks.
Definitely, thanks.
Back to you, Kyle.
All right, well, I'll make the first technical blunder of the presentation. I didn't realize I was on mute, but what I was saying to you, Mike, is thank you very much to you, Joe and Rachel, for that excellent conversation, a ton of great insights. I'm going to be leading our next panel, which is entitled Future Forward Lens, Operating in the Post-Coronavirus World. And I'd like to introduce our speakers for the panel. First, I have Rachel Casanova, who's a Senior Managing Director in Workplace Innovation at Cushman Wakefield. I have Michael Chappell, who's a principal and strategy director at Gensler, Gensler being the integrated global architecture, design, planning, and consulting firm. I have Michael Diamond. Welcome, Michael, who's a managing partner at Affinico LLC, which is a facility management services firm with 1,800 employees based out of Bridgeport, Connecticut. And lastly, I have Brian Jauntig, who's a senior director leading up property management for Atlas Capital Group. Atlas invests in opportunistic and value-add real estate in core gateway markets across the US with a primary focus in New York and Los Angeles. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm going to kick it off by asking each of you, maybe Brian, I'll start with you to give a minute, introduce yourself a little bit further and describe what your role has been in the larger industry, both prior to March and since that time.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Kyle. So as Kyle mentioned, Brian Jauntig with Atlas Capital. I'm the head of East Coast real estate for Atlas, primarily focused in New York. And been in real estate for about 15 years. Prior to Atlas, which I joined in 2016, I was with RXR and Monday Properties. So in my role, primary focus is on tenant relations, budgeting, operating, overseeing all the operations of our employees, our staff, union and non-union, and all of our vendors. So to answer the question, kind of what has it been like for the last number of years versus since March 15th? It's gone from a pretty sharp turn of, operating, infusing capital, working on major projects to really adopting and adapting to, the changes in how we have to operate today.
Okay. Rachel, how about you?
Thanks. This is Rachel Casanova. I'm the Senior Managing Director of Workplace Innovation in our consulting practice for Cushman Wakefield here in the Tri-State. Let's see, right now I'm a part of our global task force on the response to the return to work. And although the work I've done, and I've started on the client side, I was at a furniture manufacturer, I've worked in the architectural community for a long time, had my own practice before joining Cushman Wakefield. From our perspective, we're always helping clients through change. So, this is the next one. And obviously there's the downside to so many things about this virus, but it has also afforded us to rethink a different question and say, how do we manage with this change? And it suggests to us that maybe we have to stop all of the things we had been thinking, and now we need to be curious about what that future looks like. So we've been applying that from the, how do I get my shoes back on, to just go back to the way it was, and what's the long picture of how we think about talent and organizations and culture and where we work and the value of people coming together.
Okay, thank you. I would normally say Michael, but I know both of you might respond simultaneously, so I guess I'll go alphabetically. Michael Chappell, how have things looked on your side?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've focused in a similar way as Rachel has to helping organizations with transformation, and particularly leveraging the built environment along with tools and policies and technologies to help them meet their objectives. And so this is another transformation. There's, I think, the short term of getting back to work or getting back to the office. We've all been working, but certainly this is about in the short term, what does it mean to try and re-enter the office, and what's the sequencing of that, and how do you prepare people for it? So we've been talking about 3 Ps. We've been talking about how the place needs to respond, how you support people and what people come back and in what way, and what are the process changes you need to make to ensure people's health and safety and well-being. And then we've also been helping organizations look ahead. I think there is some unbelievable opportunity that this might afford us. I think we have had people, very quickly migrate to working from home, and I could see that certainly in the short term continuing. And then I think also we've had an unbelievable impact on the planet over the last couple of months. And so I think that, you know, those two things together are really encouraging things that could help us think a lot differently about how we support work post-pandemic.
Okay, thank you. And Michael Diamond, you have a unique perspective, certainly on the facility management side. Could you describe a bit about your role there prior to the past 8 weeks and then since then?
Sure. So Michael Diamond with Affinico LLC. We're comprised of Premier Maintenance and United Services. We are a janitorial provider, and we focus in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, with a concentration in Mass in Boston. Roughly about 2,000 employees and approximately about 800 sites that we service. And, you know, our life has been, you know, cleaning for so many years. And now we've had such an influx of additional services in terms of higher sanitization over the last month. And I'll talk a little bit about the go forward as we get into the program. I think the added perspective that I may be able to bring to this also is I just finished my year as president of our industry association. And so speaking to contractors around the country and a number of them that come in internationally to hear what people are doing around the country as well has helped us craft what we're doing as we go through this crisis and go forward.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for providing that perspective. Brian, I'm going to ask you a question, go back to, at Atlas, certainly you have a large office portfolio, and I'm thinking about how you might be putting together plans for managing the whole tenant arrival experience at your assets. When I think through everything from arriving, going through the door, you know, using the turnstiles, security, waiting for the elevator, pressing the elevator buttons, being in the elevator, and then arriving at someone's floor, it all seems like there's a lot of challenges to overcome. So how are you addressing that at Atlas?
Yeah, so Kyle, it's a great question, and it's a big part of the discussion right now. So as with anything that we do, you know, at our properties, and we have a mix. We have commercial, we have retail, you know, residential, industrial, but all varying, you know, sizes, asset classes, things like that. So when we started thinking about this, the approach that seemed the most logical was what we do, you know, in everyday life with our tenants, which is a collaborative approach. So how we've been operating and maintaining over the last 6 weeks or so, we've been pulling from all the various city agencies, CDC, DOH, compiling all those recommendations and those protocols, which, you know, for the most part, a majority of the population is very aware of at this point. But our thought was, you know, we have an opportunity to further develop, you know, relationships and communication with these tenants. Let's start the conversation about, you know, what we're going to be facing in 2 months. So what we did was we kind of put together a guide of all of these protocols and recommendations, everything from social distancing, traffic and movement within a property, like you just mentioned, cleaning and disinfecting, all the main focus points that everyone's looking at today, and kind of packaged it together as something, you know, from landlord, like here is for the tenants. Here's what we know today from all the health organizations and city agencies to help you as you prepare your own guides for returning to work. And then as a supplement to that, to answer your question, each property manager at every location is coming up with their own summary of every point that they're initiating at their building. So it varies by size. You know, if you have 3 main entrances or if you have 1 main entrance, how are we going to, you know, facilitate movement in and out by keeping the social distancing structure that's in place right now? How are you having people engage security and guards in the lobby? And what are you doing to maintain that distance as well in elevators, in common space, as people are waiting for elevators, and in restrooms and, you know, common spaces? So the supplement that we've put together really outlines all that. In a lot of instances, we have put graphics and on top of layouts of the lobby level of each property, you know, where people should stand and we're understanding it's going to be a guide, and people are kind of going to do what they do, but the positive in this situation is that everyone seems to be on board and working together, and delivering that to tenants as a useful guide, because in addition to being collaborative, probably the most important point as a landlord, the most important thing we can do right now is give our tenants the tools that they need to let their employees know that not only their employer, but also their landlord, property management is looking out for their health and safety, so they feel that it's okay to return to work. So it's a collaborative effort, and just really trying to pull from all the data and resources that we can today, making sure everyone has that knowledge as we work together to return to work.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, I think what Brian just described, if anything, is the innovation that Atlas is thinking of or trying to implement at its properties. So on your side, I know that Cushman Wakefield recently put out this 6 feet office report after I talked to you before I visited the site, and have a bit of what it's about, but could you describe how that came about, what your role has been in it, and the extent to which you see different landlords starting to gravitate towards implementing that?
Sure. So the 6 feet office came out of our Netherlands office, and it was really an approach and a prototype to say, what would a new workplace look like? And probably others have come along with that. When you think about the novelty of some of those ideas, they're becoming easily the solutions, but we put voice to it and we put imagery to it and literally built it in our Netherlands office. And the principles are around some of the same things that Brian talked about that has to happen in a lobby, what happens on a floor. And so everything from unidirectional travel to how do you maintain distances, to what some of the protocols would need to be, and down to some templates around what does a sign look like, what does an arrow look like, and so on. I think what's interesting, the way that I would integrate the 6 feet office and some of those concepts that Gensler, we're all doing it, we're all applying it, but that with what Brian is saying is the most controlled opportunity is on the floor. It's not necessarily safe, it's just the one we can control the most, because now we have a group of people that are sort of belonging to an organization. The opportunity, the restriction, all of that happens on the ground floor, especially in a multi-tenant building, is not only the collaboration between Atlas and its tenants, but it's tenants to tenants. And how do we communicate that? How do we communicate for confidence? And I do think we were all on a path where the value proposition of a landlord to a tenant was increasing. We were seeing that in a number of ways before all of this, whether it was what amenities can we put in, but almost that I did belong to a community by being an employee of a tenant in a certain building. And now we have this even more elevated opportunity for that. And I think what the game that we're all in, which is the exciting innovation, Michael Chappell mentioned it before, like this is an exciting time, is how do we not create such a sterile environment where coming just isn't worth it? I mean, no one wants to feel like they're in kindergarten where they're told walk this way and you can only go left and you can't do this. We have to live through that right now. But if we apply the Disney way, you stand online at Disney World a whole lot, and yet everyone loves when they leave Disney World the entire experience. So the opportunity right now is how do we use this new set of rules, but create new ways of thinking about a tenant, tenant to tenant, tenant to landlord. How does that community just continue to be something better as opposed to something that is all the limitations of what we can't have anymore? And so I just bridge all of that together, that what happens when I get to a floor, if I can't have a meeting, if I can't get up from my desk without great restraint on what I do, will I keep coming? And we're looking on the demand side as to who needs to come, who will come, who's motivated, and the human psyche, once we're allowed, who's going to do it, and finding new ways to make that great, not make that just a limitation of what we used to have.
And Michael Chappell, what are you hearing from your clients in terms of what Rachel just outlined? Are they acknowledging that they want to implement these measures in the shorter term, but are hoping that they'll become more acclimated to them and it's the new normal? Or how are you advising your clients that you work with in this capacity?
Yeah, I mean, some of what you're talking about is just thinking about the element of time. And I think that is somewhat a challenging thing because we're in an uncertain time and we don't have all the answers. And so it's hard to think about both what do we do tomorrow and what might that mean for the next day. And so what I mean by that is, thinking about the measures we put in place to help people return to the office and feel safe and keep transmissions down are not the same things we might do tomorrow or post-pandemic. And so one of the things that we're trying to advocate a lot for with our clients is to set up measures to learn to then evolve. And I think that has two means. One is that you're being thoughtful and strategic about how you're going about things, that if you bring a small percentage of people back to the work environment, you can learn about what works, how people feel about it, and then evolve, even in a sort of pandemic environment. And then you can continue to build on those learnings to figure out what the new normal might be like. And I think the second important element of that is we're not in a place where people feel safe and it's uncertain. And so the more that you ask and you engage people and they participate in the solutions, or you're able to communicate what you're doing in response to what you're hearing from your staff or your tenants, the more confident they're going to be and the safer that they're going to feel. And so I think to get to tomorrow, we need to learn about how today is working. And there, I was on 2 calls yesterday, 2 meetings yesterday, where I was asked, is this the death of the open plan or is this the death of the conference room? And the answer is, on what timeline are you talking about? Yeah, I don't think we're going to meet in person in the same way tomorrow as we will the next day, but it's certainly not the death of the conference room.
And if I could reinforce what you're saying, Michael, what I often say to clients is we weren't all the same when we went into this. We're not all the same organizations now. Our cultures differ. And we largely are a group of real estate minded people coming up with a set of answers. And in a lot of the work that we did before this, it was about listening and it was about understanding what people needed. I mean, if you look at UX design, the entire principle is around coming up with a product and validating it and testing it. So I do agree entirely that it is priceless to be willing to go ask people and listen and figure out what's working well, what's not, show employees of our buildings, this is our idea. Why would this work? Why wouldn't it work? We can't imagine that we know everything now, no different from not knowing everything before. And there's ways to do this at scale, and there's ways to be willing to say, we're testing this. There are no best practices. There is no precedent here that says we know. And different glass half full, glass half empty people, one will say, oh gosh, I'm not getting in an elevator, people are so disrespectful and so on. And then other people say, come on, common sense will take over. We don't know. We all have to be in a place where we're ready to be really flexible in how we do this. And that again is our opportunity right now.
Yeah, okay. And Michael Diamond, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to make just one quick point. I think part of what that means is thinking about 3 timelines all at the same time, which is not easy to do. It's thinking about day 1 reentry and all the logistics and planning for that, in parallel to thinking about how you're going to learn for whatever the day 2 might be like as you learn and evolve and maybe bring more people back to the office. And the third timeline is imagining tomorrow. And I think it's hard to think about all those 3 horizons at the same time, but I think complex and thoughtful organizations are going to be able to plan and do all 3 at the same time.
And Michael Diamond, when you hear Michael Chappell talk about tenants' desire to and need to feel safe in the buildings, how have you gone about revising any of the protocols in place at your firm, services, products that you offer the market in response to what has unfolded over the past 2 months?
So I mirror somewhat what Michael and Rachel had said in terms of day 1 versus day 2. To us, day 1 is today with, as we have occupants of buildings, occupancy is way down. Some buildings have retained more staff than others. Some have made deeper cuts because of budgets or maybe rent changes. So we're operating with some capacity to keep up with high touch cleaning. I did 2 exercises this morning for clients that we were comparing their current set of specifications to what they would like to have as they come back to work. And the challenge is a lot of the cleaning industry has been about cleaning dirt in the past. And what will shift and what is shifting is sanitizing. And that's a different process, similar to think of sanitizing a hospital room compared to cleaning an office. And most customers, whether it be corporate headquarters or multi-tenant buildings, have wanted to be in a competitive price range. So it's more about cleaning dirt. And when you get into sanitizing, you're looking about more labor or more product needs to be able to do that. So we're currently working under really the older method, which is cleaning dirt, and now talking to clients about how we change that to a sanitizing method. And we're able to do some of that today with the capacity we might have with lower occupancies, but as people come back, we have to shift our thinking in terms of where we get the resources to minimize any cost increases. So some of that might be involved with shifting some of the specifications around, maybe less vacuuming and more high-touch cleaning, maybe some other project work that we can reallocate that labor into more nightly labor to use high-touch surface cleaning. And in corporate headquarters, obviously, it's all surfaces within the building. With landlords, with multi-tenant, it's high-touch in the common areas, and then the tenants may decide what they want to do within their space. The other thing that we're looking at now, and our industry association is working quickly on this, to have some certifications behind us so that we can have cleaners and managers that are certified. There's a certification out now called a microbial warrior, where someone's learning the science behind cleaning and can bring that to the job. And then additionally, we have to talk, we're adding communication methods so that as we talk to our cleaners, if they're not feeling well, there's ways that we can capture that information so we stop them from coming in and possibly spreading any virus, as well as then alerting our customers to someone might have an illness. More of an issue today, but I think going forward, it's going to be an issue that we're going to have a reporting feature to it. And I think the last part of it is also part of the new products that are available. We're looking into everything from UV lights to robotic vacuums to some products that are adhesives that can protect doorknobs and door handles differently, that are self-cleaning, to some of the electrostatic misting machines. So a lot of content there. If there's more questions about it, I'm happy to handle them.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Michael. Brian, back to you. When you hear some of the comments that everyone's made about the nature of collaborative space at any given asset, for example, your office buildings, what do you think is the future there in terms of the need to connect in person? I mean, are you already thinking about different common area spaces, or conference rooms or gyms or facilities like that being less used? And what conversations are unfolding as we speak at Atlas on that topic?
Right. I think the foundation of every part of this thinking is pretty much based on a lot of things that Rachel and Michael touched on about, this is not % occupancy day one. This will be a gradual shift back into, with that said, we'll see a percentage increase of tenants come back over time and be able to kind of gauge. But everything that we're doing right now, I'll give you actual examples, athletic clubs at buildings in New York that we manage, and buildings that an athletic club that we have in Los Angeles, they're closed for the foreseeable future. Anything in a common space that had furniture for tenants, if we have a lobby that's more of a open public thoroughfare, that's temporary closed as well. Amenities where people convene, were the first things to go. And I think that kind of touches back on the way people feel, right? They want to come into a space, when they return and know that every potential hazard or, every idea of health and safety for them, all these protocols have been put into place, for their own safety. So I think, we'll have a gradual return to that at some point in time. We'll get more information as the percentages of the workforce returns to work. But as far as Atlas is concerned, we're erring on the side of caution as much as possible. We're taking away every obstacle to every obstacle that would make someone not feel safe to enter the workspace. So that's removing furniture, making sure there isn't the option for people available to, you know, get together in community amenity spaces, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess taking that one step further, Rachel, when you think about the collaborative workspace, I think of co-working concepts. Have you done much work, and I'll ask Michael as well afterwards, what do you think the future of co-working is with this? Do you think it's kind of more like the 3 timelines he alluded to, where you have to have a kind of a nearer term, middle term, and longer term view? Or do you think the likes of, you know, WeWork, Industrious, IWC have seen their best days?
So if we take the names out of who they are and just the concept of a place that I can come work and I can have a desk when I need it, or a small group of people in a suite, yes and yes. So as far as the timeline, I don't think of the timeline as much as a date or a weeks, as much as we think about, you know, I may be launching into what the governors of the tri-state are talking about, but testing, tracing, isolating, treatment to vaccine, that the more those things progress, the more this becomes potentially more of a nuisance and something that I don't want, but not something that will bring me the fear that I could die from it. So we have to try to imagine this in a longer game. And I think when we think about, let's just take treatment, maybe that's closer than vaccine. We think that there will be opportunities for them to succeed. And one of the reasons I say that is if the hardest thing is the last mile, the easiest thing is the last mile, but getting from point A to that point maintains a challenge that we're still not sure how it's going to play out. So mass transportation and public transportation and so on. Yet people may be willing and able to leave their home. Not for everyone, their home environment is not the place that they can be the most productive. So we also think in terms of, as the science progresses, might there be a place where I can't get to the office, but I could get to an office? I can get to a place. I was just part of a conversation listening in to some UK folks, Sir Walter Lipton and Despina from our organization, talking about maybe one of the phases back is parks, right? What if parks become the next place? So I can be outside, I can get there on foot. Can I go there? Is the next place that I can get to a building that offers me some things, but maybe it's not my workplace. So certainly in that early stage, I think we do see these flexible spaces as places that people that might be a person's transition back, just like an organization has a transition back. Might we see more of that in distributed places that eliminate some of the transportation issues of central business districts? And then if we see people ready for that, might that also maintain itself in a longer term way? So I don't think we think it goes away. And we're going to see kind of how the human psyche takes this. I think we can't only think about the world of work. Let's think about, as consumers, how do we behave? Do we start going to restaurants? Will we go to a movie theater? Will we go to the theater? Will we play sports where there's contact? As we see those things, I don't think, to Michael Diamond's point, I don't think that cleaning will go away. We will never unknow this, but it will become something that is obviously more sustainable. So those things might happen, but if we put those into place, I do think the comfort of those alternative ways of working do have longevity.
Okay. And Michael, Chappell, to follow up on that, I think you referenced earlier in the conversation the 3 Ps, but then yesterday, I know when we chatted briefly, you had mentioned the 3 Cs, which I think were connection, collaboration, and perhaps culture. Yeah, how do those values factor into what would be conceived as a future office design, whether that's the collaborative nature of a traditional office or co-working?
I like an alliteration, so thanks for calling that out. Yeah, I mean, to build on Rachel's point, I think, and I'll get to then what the future might be like. I think, you know, something that's being grappled with is, you know, there's a lot of consolidation, particularly around the work environment, and trying to rationalize that. And I think, you know, co-working, particularly in an enterprise level, has been seen as a flexible option if you were ramping up, or you were renovating, or you needed additional space, or you wanted to try something new. And so I could see that being an option to maybe distribute a little bit, as Rachel was saying, to maybe have spaces that are a little closer to your home, not have to come into an urban environment. might be something that supports some of the sort of transitioning back to the office in the short term. I think the longer term could be about those C's. And I think part of that, I'm encouraged by just how quickly and largely successfully it sounds like most organizations have transitioned to remote working. If you go, I'll go back a little bit to go forward. If you were to ask, Fortune 500 organizations in January, how long would it take you to transition everyone to, 100% of your staff to remote working from home? They would have said 6, 8, 12 months, and instead it happened in a business week. And so I think that it's an imperative right now, but largely we're hearing it's been pretty successful. And so I think that probably has some longevity. I don't know in what proportion, what roles, but I think certainly some. And so I think that could mean that the office post-pandemic is more about connecting, collaborating, convening, and supporting organizational culture. And it might not be designed around a lot of desks and then some other choice spaces. I think you could see a greater proportion of spaces that are about teaming and bringing people together, particularly when you're able to do some breadth of work, whether it's virtual collaboration or focus work outside of the office.
Okay, that's good. That's great perspective. Michael Diamond, if you heard, let's say next week, that the larger majority of your clients were planning to open up their offices again, or that buildings were opening up for business, what would be some of your concerns that would cause you to say, we're not ready for this, whether it's staffing or materials that you would need, when you think about the need to keep not only your clients safe, but also your employees?
You hit a nail on the head for both of them. Staffing is a major concern of ours. We had a number of clients retain people just for the purpose of not having to recruit them again to get them back. And we had a fair share of layoffs. But getting people back, from what I understand, different states have different unemployment laws. Some will allow people to stay on unemployment longer. And in some cases, they could be making the same or even greater money with the additional federal money that's been handed out. And so if people claim that they have a person ill at home or someone that they don't want to put at risk, they could not come back to work. So we are concerned about getting all of our staff back as buildings reoccupy. We have a lot of hardworking folks, and we have a lot of other ones that are fearful, and that's a concern. Number two, having the right PPE. We've had such a tremendous difficulty, as I'm sure everybody else on this call has, of finding all the PPE, and we've been able to source it, but it's at a premium right now, and some of it's not coming back into the country from where it's manufactured. So my recommendation to all buildings is to load up your supplies for at least a 1-month supply going forward and keep that in reserve. And we're trying to do the same thing. So having all the right protective equipment and devices for our people to work with, and then what our tenants may need for their occupants. I would, as we're at limited time here, just make sure I mention everybody, the nurses and the healthcare workers out there are heroes, but I view our cleaners as also people really doing some great work. They're scared, but they're dedicated and they're coming to work. So thank the people within your buildings, because they're really good folks that are out there doing this work.
Have you had much attrition on your side of people who have said, I just don't want to be exposed to this going forward, Michael?
Some. I would say it's mostly people with some health issues or with maybe people over 65. Most people, I would say, that are in not those two categories have been coming to work where we've had the jobs to offer them.
Got it. Okay. And then Brian, I'll quickly ask you, with the reopening, what do you view as maybe one or two of the biggest issues to solve if you had received a directive, hey, we're going to completely open up our building, whether that is in Los Angeles or here? And I know there are different environments in terms of the city's density. What do you view as the main impediments?
If things were to open up on a larger scale, quicker than we're expecting, it's really just maintaining the structure and the new process that we have to abide by. By process, I mean simply way that you enter a building, who you're checking in with, whether or not you're getting a survey about certain health conditions, or whether the the tenant themselves or things for the employees really abide by. I think Bill Diamond touched on a really important point before, a major point that we're stressing to our tenants as they consider return to work strategies. Landlords and owners need to certainly lead by example. And as he mentioned, the 32 BJ, the 94 teams, all maintenance teams, rock stars doing amazing jobs. Making sure everybody's protected is really important. Lobby staffing, security, anyone working in a building capacity needs to make sure PPE is maintained. And then on the other side of that, we need to make sure tenants are aware of what their responsibilities are, is where the face of the building is, as they enter. So I think a lot of concerns can be avoided if people just take the time, consider all the protocols and recommendations that need to be followed. And, as landlord, we're going to do our best to make sure we're conveying everything, as up to date as possible for everybody at our properties.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that perspective. I want to pause for a moment and say if there's anyone who's listening who wants to ask a question, again, we're continuing to field them, please do so via the Q&A. Have about 8 more minutes here. I want to ask a question, which Rachel, you had alluded to earlier. So I'll start with you on the technology side. I've read multiple articles in the likes of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal about the race that's going on to develop technologies so that there can be less contact between tenants and surfaces that would potentially result in infections. And there's major landlords who I think the prior panel mentioned as well, who are in the process of trying to make that more mainstream. To what extent do you feel like that is the focus of a lot of landlords? And Rachel, after you speak, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well, Brian and Michael, on that same topic.
Sure. So one of the places to start is certainly on touch points. And what we like to do is we really think about journey mapping. So take it from the human perspective of all the things they have to do to go to work and thinking about the analog versus the technology solution. But that's good enough. That gives us a la carte pieces of technology. Then the big challenge is how do we link that up so that the user experience is somewhat simplified. So if I have to go to one app to go get the elevator and one app to go reserve a seat and so on, from a user perspective, I'm fatigued just thinking about all of that. But I think it's about process. I think it's about communication. So if we end up in a situation where we have green days, yellow days, red days, for example, where we don't see a linear path, how does the building communicate to the occupier, who communicates to the employee that we're having one of those if I need to make changes? So communication, I think, and thinking about technology, or how does a janitorial staff communicate easily that this has been cleaned, that hasn't been cleaned, or even taking what I used to call like the bowels of the building, the BMS system, that was something that we cared about, that may have a greater want to be visible in real-time data sharing. So the solutions, I think, are, if you ask me the question, what I think is the biggest challenge, it plays out in technology also. The biggest challenge is that everyone has to play, it's like we're in one movie. And I worked at RGA where Bob Greenberg, the founder, would say, making a movie is the most collaborative thing you can possibly have. And I think we're headed there, that everything from the person who's cleaning something, like you said, Michael, to the person who's security, to the employer, to the on-brand, all of those things have to sing and have to really not confuse people. So the thinking about how technology from a building system to a technology of how do I reserve the conference room or a seat, all of that. And it's not one system today, because I have, the building, I have MTA telling me one thing, I have my employer giving me something. I think we've elevated the ask to figure out how do we use technology to simplify and create better environments for people from the minute I leave my home.
And then Michael Chappell, I presume if there's any firm that's aware of the latest advancements on the technological front, it would be Gensler, given its track record. What are you seeing on the technology side among different clients that you're working with?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think one thing building on what Rachel was saying, I think there needs to be and is starting to be much more integration across what maybe had been silos in organizations. So certainly to plan to go back to work, it needs to be real estate and technology and facilities and HR and communications all working together. I think there was a quick flurry to explore what technology solutions are going to be the ones that help keep people safe within the work environment. And some of those will be worthwhile. So touchless items in bathrooms and other places that are more responsive. Some newer buildings have them already, others could be retrofit. And so, I think there'll be a big sort of cost weighing about what the cost and benefit of integrating that technology in the short term. I think certainly in the longer term, we'll start to see more of that. And I could imagine that there could be, hopefully we're past this pandemic, but I think, healthy buildings could be a pretty big marketing play for landlords and developers. I also think, staying on the technology thread, that right now we're all talking heads on screens. We're all working from home. There's some, it's not perfect, but there's some equitability there. And I think when we go back to work, there's going to be a lot of unequitability. You'll have some people in the office, some people in rooms together, probably socially distanced, and then you have other people on screens. And I think, thinking carefully about how things are more equitable, how we participate and collaborate equitably, so that, it used to be most people work together and others would dial in. You'd forget about them. You wouldn't pull up the screen. You wouldn't show things. We're all getting much better at that, but we're all on the same playing field today. And I think as we think about what work is going to be like in the future, and if remote work continues to be a big part of our how we work, then we'll need to start to figure that out. And it's both etiquette as well as technology.
Okay, and then I appreciate that comment. Brian, is the HR group at Atlas swamped right now trying to hire engineers to build out, technology platform to implement at your assets, or how do you view that?
Well, I was going to say, I agree a lot completely with what Rachel was talking about the collaborative experience. And, to date, what we have been working on and installing at larger properties is the tenant app. A lot of landlords have them now, and you have, in some instances, you have a barcode scan to get on the shuttle that takes you to the nearest mass transit point. You can register yourself for a gym class. You can order a food delivery or pickup at one of the restaurants in the lobby, things of that nature. I think that's really going to come to the forefront now, as we all are talking heads and we're all in the same boat, trying to figure out ways that we can really tie all this information together, take what we already have, and then kind of wrap it all up in a package that benefits tenants and employees as far as health and safety is concerned, and really drive that point home with all building occupants.
And then, thank you, Brian. And Michael Diamond, what's going on in your mind when you hear Brian talk about the technology that's on his mind, and you have to imagine that there's other landlords who may have a slightly different platform or different app or different technology, and you're going to be an integral part of that based on your business. Are you starting to have conversations as to how you'll have to adapt on the technological side?
Yeah, I mean, there's two challenges to that for us. One, there's so many different processes or apps. So, we work with WorkSpeed or Building Engines and a variety of other things where we fit into the building's envelopes or the people that we're working with. The other challenge is the technology education that our workers need. So if it's a supervisor or a manager, that usually works pretty well. But as we have to educate a cleaner in the field, it's just going to take some time and training, and obviously things in bilingual instructions. So, I think our industry as a whole is game for that. It's just a matter of getting the right training and getting integrated into the systems that each particular site wants to use.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I know 45 minutes goes by quickly, especially since all of you have such great insights and experience. But Michael, two times, Michael, Rachel, and Brian, thank you very, very much for sharing all the information you did today. On behalf of the 4 chapters that I mentioned at the beginning, we appreciate everyone participating, and please stay tuned. We look forward to planning other events within the NAIOP chapters in the coming weeks as this situation continues to unfold. So thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for
That's
having
all.
me.
Bye-bye.